the full Board of Governors. Welcome. Roll call, please. Mr. Devlin.
Here.
Dr. Chase.
Present.
Stafford.
Present.
Duncan. Mr. Edwards.
Here.
Ms. Martin.
Here.
Mosley. He's here. Tappan. Here. Parker. Here. Harris.
Yes.
Mr. Smith, not here. Scarborough.
Here.
Mr. Temple.
Here.
And Dr. Zachariah.
Here.
Madam Chair, you do have a quorum. Thank you very much. Good afternoon after a long morning of great discussion. First, I want to thank you, President Adams, for your hospitality, for your gracious hospitality. I enjoyed getting to sit with you at lunch. Would you like to address the board? This is your chance.
Well,
You bought lunch, you can get anything you want.
let me pull out this list. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and to members of the Board of Governors. The entire university family is pleased to host you for this meeting, and we hope that our facilities and all of the amenities that we have provided have facilitated excellent meeting experience for you. So thank you so much for being here.
And please extend our appreciation to Chairman Jennings and your Board of Trustees and all your staff. They've done a beautiful job.
Thank you.
I know we're no trouble, but thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
As I begin my remarks, I want to wish us a happy birthday. This board is now 5 years old. We certainly are an emerging board, but after the discussion in our wonderful committees today, I think we are fastly emerging, quickly emerging. Our board chairs and our members are so engaged. Just to remind you, this is a volunteer board. It's a commitment just to read the agenda, much less discuss it. So thank all of you very much for your public service. There's no more important service in this state. I may be a bit prejudiced, but no more important than this board. Last week, Governor Chris unveiled his budget recommendations for the 09-10. 09-10? Yeah, 09. Okay. For the university system. He was positive in his recommendations, and he certainly made a statement of support. I want to thank him very much for that and his continued commitment to our university system. I recognize he has a few more obligations than we do, but I appreciate his support. We cannot ignore the possibility of additional budget cuts for the current 07-08 academic year. We've discussed that for a long time, including this morning. The special session last September cut SUS base funding by nearly $100 million. Given the slide in the state's revenue, a looming shortfall of nearly $2 billion in 09. We're very concerned about that. We want to be supportive of our universities and do what's in the best interest of our students. University presidents and trustees are going to have to make very difficult, serious decisions. We're not thrilled by the prospect of historic low FTE funding. Our board this morning in our discussions, is beginning to make very difficult decisions. We're all here for the best interest of the students and for the system and for our state. All of Florida government is feeling the pain, and we certainly are no exception. We have to bear our share of the burden, but we believe that we are part of the solution. It's our responsibility to have the reality of our budgets and our spending in line with the money that's available. Because most of our state appropriations goes to salaries for the professors who teach and the staff who keep our universities operating. It's difficult and impossible to take multi-million-dollar cuts in appropriations without suffering the pain of layoffs. That's the hard truth, the difficulty for our presidents and our trustees. We've asked them to make these layoffs as carefully as possible. We are dedicated to access for all qualified students. The reality is that we cannot in good faith enroll students who will not get a quality and competitive degree or can't get any degree in appropriate time. Success is as important as access. We are talking about students who will want to graduate and be productive members of our state, and that is a solution to an economic downturn. We simply have to do the right thing, and it's not always the easiest thing to do. Articulation, the smooth transfer of students from the community colleges to our universities is a sacred agreement in this state. It is the one thing that anyone I've ever talked to about the state of Florida says we do better than any other state. I believe that's true. I've always supported this policy. I still support the policy. We're talking about dollars available, and I hope now is not the time. But at some point, in addressing serious budget shortfalls, we will have to recognize and support our students that are in our universities now. We may have to make some hard choices. How can we hold all AA transfers above the suffering of other students, or automatically transfer them into a system that doesn't have enough faculty and staff to graduate in an appropriate time? I am not saying that now is the time. I'm saying that we have to plan and work within the budgets and ask the legislature to fund us so that won't be the case. It is something that works so well, but the reality is, at what point you have to address it. We are currently, this will be a surprise to you, we are currently involved in litigation on several different fronts. In July, the board voted to join the lawsuit brought by former Governor Bob Graham and others seeking clarification from the court as to the scope of the board's authority under the Constitution, authority given to the board. Recently, the court ruled that based on allegations in the complaint, the board did not have standing to request this clarification. While we are disappointed in the court's ruling, we will be filing an amended complaint and are optimistic that we can satisfy the court's concern. We believe that our authority comes from the overwhelming support of Florida citizens who voted for our constitutional amendment creating our board. The board is also a defendant in a lawsuit pending in federal court that was brought by the Faculty Senate of FIU and faculty members from other universities. In that case, faculty is challenging a statute that prohibits the use of state or non-state funds on activities related to or involving travel to Cuba and other countries designated by the federal government as terrorist-sponsoring nations as violating the federal constitution. Several of our universities have federal licenses that authorize their faculty and students to travel to Cuba to participate in educational programs and research. These activities have been financed primarily with federal and private grant monies. Recently, the board has taken a position independent from that of the state as to the prohibition on the use of non-state funds, which we believe are within our constitutional authority to control and manage. Also, the United Faculty of Florida and several faculty members have recently filed suit in state court challenging the same statute. I have been named as a defendant in the suit based on my official capacity as the chair of the board. UFF claims that this statute violates several state constitutional provisions, including the board's constitutional authority over the non-state funds made available to the state universities. These are all matters of serious concern to the board and impact the board's ability to manage the state university system consistent with the duties and responsibilities entrusted to the board by the people of the state. We take this responsibility very seriously. In exercising these responsibilities, we must always endeavor to act in the best interest of our students, our faculty, our universities, but overall for our state. I am pleased about the serious, complicated discussions that are occurring now regarding the Byrd Institute in Tampa on USF's campus. Governor McDivitt is now a representative on that board. We are in good hands. I want to assure today Senator Chris, Senator Peyton, and Senator Joyner and other lawmakers that we are giving serious study to the range of options. Under any scenario, we believe that the Institute, while maintaining its statewide mission, should be linked more closely to the University of South Florida. We'll look forward to a report from Vice Chairman McDivitt as this progresses. Our next full meeting will be March the 26th and 27th at Florida State University in Tallahassee. We have also scheduled a telephone conference call for February the 21st. So if you'll please put that on your calendar, we will only have that call if there's any business to come before the board. With that, I'd like to ask approval of 2 sets of minutes. Do we need separate motions? Can we do it together? Okay.
Move approval.
Thank you. A second. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. And just for the system, we're going to hear from our chancellor, and then we're going to move to the action items while we have everybody's attention, and then we'll go back. So, Chancellor.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. First of all, I know that the board will join with me in thanking Governor Christ for hosting the reception last night for our board and for our presidents and for members of our boards of trustees who could attend. It was a wonderful gesture on the governor's part. I know there was a lot of good conversation, and we really appreciate the fact that the governor had time to host us. As we enter the new year, I do want to thank our board members for their commitment to public service. As Madam Chair pointed out, January 2008 marks the 5th anniversary of the Board of Governors. A number of you have stuck with us from the inception of this board, and in particular, I want to thank you for your determination to honor the will of the nearly 2.8 million voters in this state who created the Board of Governors in 2002. I also want to thank Governor Christ, particularly for his intent to hold us harmless from budget cuts next year. And indeed, as Tim Jones pointed out, he did recommend incremental funding in what obviously is going to be one of the most difficult years that our state has ever faced. We are counting on the legislature to shield us from budget cuts as well. There's a saying that applies: if your neighbor's house was on fire, would you not lend her a hose? That's the question. The governor has answered in the affirmative. Thank you, Governor Christ. Forward by Design. At your last meeting, you approved Forward by Design, and we're now in the process of implementing your mandate. We've set up presidential task groups to help us craft a compact, to fashion an accord, and to identify and provide options for appropriate, predictable funding. The task group on compacts has met. You've seen their work. Thank you to Presidents Maydeek, Genshaft, Bradshaw, and Michelson. The task group on the accord has met twice. 2 drafts have been written. Drafts will soon be presented to Mr. Colson, who is primed to work with us to bring about an accord. So I want to thank Presidents Hitt, Machen, and Delaney for that. The task group on financials has not yet met. There is no chair. I've asked the former Speaker of the House, President of Florida State University, to provide leadership on this important legislative-oriented initiative. I'm sure they'll be meeting soon. There are some developments that are worth noting in other states that have a bearing on Forward by Design. In New York, there's a sense of urgency. Governor Spitzer, through his New York State Commission on Higher Education, has just called for major enhancements to public universities there in a renewed effort to raise national rankings in both the SUNY and CUNY systems. Part of this is to hire an additional 2,000 full-time faculty and 250 eminent scholars over the next 5 years. It's interesting to note that their objective is to raise rankings. Our objective in our Forward by Design is to raise the number of individuals with degrees in this state. In North Carolina, the Board of Governors there has just released a roadmap for new system and public university initiatives. The intent, led by President Erskine Bowles, is to outline how the University of North Carolina can respond more directly and proactively to the 21st century challenges facing North Carolina both now and in the future. There is a recognition that the UNC system plays an intimate role, not just in the formal education of the citizens of the state, but also in the active search for solutions. Elsewhere, and some of you may have seen this already, in the face of significant budget difficulties, the California compact between the governor there and higher education may be unraveling. The Los Angeles Times has pointed out that given the growing budget deficit in California, that it's highly unlikely that the pact will be operated this year. The result will be that there's a recommendation that in the Cal State system, which, as President Medic pointed out, educates the majority of students in California for baccalaureate, they're already looking at a 10% tuition increase. The UC system, the world's best, is now looking at a tuition increase of at least 7.4%, but it does promise to raise tuition higher if it's to absorb its share of a proposed $650 million base budget higher education cut. So, as you can see, there's a broader context in which our deliberations occur, and certainly the presidents recognize that because they have to retain faculty and recruit faculty in this kind of environment. I'm not anxious to see any of our eminent scholars end up in New York, and I know that board shares that concern with me. We've included in your booklet our accountability report. That's under the consent agenda. In it, we report on how we're doing as a system. In short, not so good, as we have already reported to you. We're stagnant in graduation rates. Our percentage of African American students graduating has declined slightly. We're flat or declining in research per capita, and worse, our retention rates are declining, a sure sign that our graduation rates are likely to decline in the coming years. We are slowing down as a system. In essence, we're running out of gas, and every president and every local board plainly knows this. How many of you have seen our new website? Our goal is to promote the value of the system and the many contributions it makes to the state and our communities. I hope you'll look at it. Finally, there have been some distance learning challenges. In recent weeks, we've read about inadequate controls on distance learning examinations. I'm asking presidents to review their policies and procedures related to distance learning examinations. They should be able to provide assurance to their boards that there are adequate controls in place to prevent cheating. I would expect that our presidents will be working with their faculty senates and with other faculty governance bodies to ensure that these controls are there. This evening, ladies and gentlemen, Florida Atlantic University is hosting a presidential debate, and we hope that you can tune in. This will be the Republican candidates, and partly as a result of the initiative taken by the FAU board and President Rogan, the decision was made to host those debates at FAU. FAU's engagement in this process honors us, and we're very proud of the fact that they not only bring presidential candidates to the campus, but they've done a superb job in getting students engaged in the broader issues of what their civic and electoral responsibilities are. That concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. And thank you. He works tirelessly not only to move the university system in the direction that we're all planning for it to move, but to communicate with all of us and try to keep us on track. Thank you very much, Chancellor. We'll move to 6, and we'll go to action items, status reports. We'll begin with you, Governor Edwards, Chairman Edwards, on the trustee nominee.
Thank you. As everyone will recall, we adopted procedures for appointment and reappointment of trustees, one of which was that the candidates were to be interviewed. At the time we did the interview, Kevin Twilme from the University of North Florida was not available to be interviewed. We asked Elizabeth Parker to conduct the interview for our committee. She has done so, and she will now make a recommendation.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had the pleasure of actually meeting with Kevin Toomey, and certainly I want to recommend his approval as a member of the Board of Trustees of the University of North Florida. What's interesting about him is that he is a remarkable person and certainly a benefit to the board. He is pretty committed to the university and has a tremendous financial background. I think that's been a big asset for the university. He has just a real sense of time and commitment. He didn't graduate from the University of North Florida. He made it clear all his dollars go to the University of North Florida. And I think he's given his time, talent, and treasures. Based upon that, I'd like to recommend the approval of Kevin Toomey as a new trustee for the University of North Florida.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, motion passed. And that concludes our report.
Thank you, Chairman Edwards. Chairman Parker.
There were several items that we addressed in the Facilities Committee on yesterday that I'd like to bring to the full board's attention for approval. The first is, as you know, we had another revenue estimating conference since our last meeting, and we had made some proposed adjustments to our LBR. Those adjustments were actually presented in the information that was sent out to the full body in preparation for the meeting, and were discussed in your board briefings. That detail did not change. Hence, I'd like for the board to consider a motion to amend the legislative budget request as presented. The other thing I want to bring to the board's attention is that, we did set up some guidelines for the approval of items that go on our PICO list, and I'd like to commend the staff for definitely following those guidelines, as well as commend the staff for working closely with the universities to address any special needs that they have.
All right, Governor Parker, I wasn't paying attention. You moved that, there was a second?
Yes,
but
there
we
was.
did not vote. Any
Right.
discussion?
Yes.
Your discussion?
This is
yes.
PICO?
Yes. This is amended additional money. Is that correct?
That's
Chairman?
correct.
That embrace, what?
Yes.
All right, I'd like to draw your attention to page 7.
Move the microphone, please.
I'd like to draw your attention to page 7. Let me introduce my notion by reminding us that we went through a budget committee meeting where we heard endlessly about the difficult economic times that the state of Florida has fallen upon. And I didn't hear anyone challenge what I'll call that reality. And we also today have discussed the need for our universities to achieve greater funding. We've talked about tuition increases. We've talked actually about a very substantial tuition increase. And we talked about passing on to our universities, in our judgment, the ability to constrain enrollment. In that environment, I question whether we should go forward with the Lakeland campus, which I note in this document has an investment at this time of $35 million. And of course, the campus itself will drag with it the need for faculty and all of the other things that a campus requires. And so I would hope that we are facile enough that when we see times change, that we're willing to also look at some of the things that we previously looked at through one set of glasses, so to speak, that now may look quite differently. I'm not making a motion today, or I'm not going to go much beyond raising the notion that maybe this is not the right time to invest this kind of money in another campus while we're in the process of, one might say, if not shrinking, certainly curtailing the investments in our existing core universities. And so I just wanted to make sure I raised that today.
Comments, any other comments?
Other than I think that he's right, it is a new start to something that I don't think our financial situation in the state is such that we should be looking at new starts at this point until it resolves itself.
More discussion?
Madam Chair, because of the significant revenue shortfall, which is, I believe, about 9% or so, And we heard this morning from the Chancellor about the shrinkage of our student enrollment, the retention, the graduation and such. And I believe that at this point in time, we should probably spend more time to fix that rather than building more bricks and mortar. So I would be opposed to any kind of, money is being, spent to construct things, then the money can be, spent wisely to accommodate the promise that we have.
Discussion?
I totally understand and share some of the concerns that are being voiced. The one thing, having been on the USF board, though, that I will say is that at least to this point, our policy has been to have the Board of Trustees provide these priorities and recommendations to us. And I don't know in this venue we should change that at this point without maybe hearing back from their board or what their dialogue has been on that point. And, that it may be something, I think if I understand Chair Parker, that there's kind of one more bite at the apple on the PICO list, and this doesn't have to be a decision we make today. Is that correct?
That's correct. Well, it's important that we vote out something today, and then there is going to be another PICO revenue estimating conference between now and our meeting in March, and so there will be at least one more adjustment that we will consider as a board.
But if we approve this today, this amount is approved, that would only be the additional money. Any other discussion? President Ginshaw.
I just wanted to tell people a little bit about this. This, as you know, has been going on for about 10 years when this is donated land, and the city has put up $5 million and the county has put up $5 million with the match, so it's a $20 million plus land donation, which is about $30 million in it. And so the project alone is around a $50 million deal, but it has a stipulation that it must have buildings built on it at this point in time. And so this is part of the PICO money that is coming in, and it would be the beginning of a project that is in the largest land mass of a county in the state of Florida, in one of the fastest growing counties in the state of Florida on the high-tech corridor, the I-4 corridor. So I just think that it's important for people to understand and know the backdrop of all this.
Thank you.
Very important. The timing is critical.
Discussion? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Dr. Patterson.
I couldn't adequately hear the comments that were made about Governor Parker. You said we would pass out the PICO list, but we will be readdressing these priorities as the funding.
No. What I said was that, as you're aware, the number changes because there's several different revenue estimating conferences. There's going to be one more revenue estimating conference between now and the time we meet again. So we're hoping that we get more money and that will cause us to come back and actually look at the list another time in March. So at our March meeting, we'll have another facilities committee meeting. At that time, we'll again look at our numbers and possibly make some more adjustments to the list.
But that doesn't, Chancellor, explain that. We are approving this list. It would be approving additional money and making adjustments if we have more money. Is that correct?
Correct, and I don't recall that there's a precedent for disapproving a prior list and modifying it.
May I ask a question? If the university doesn't sound like President Ginshaft is of that opinion, but should that board want to revise their list, do they have the opportunity to come back to us and present that when we're re-voting on it?
Historically, what we have done is we've done everything we can do to work with the universities. So if something were to happen between now and March, and if the Board of Trustees and the President had some different idea that they wanted to present to the body, we consider it. But at this point, we're talking about what might happen. Today we're passing out a list with the assumption that it may be that we don't get any more money. So we're moving forward because the trustees have submitted this as their PICO list, and we followed our guidelines. And at this point, based upon the dollars that we have, we're recommending and we move forward with the adjustments as presented in the committee on yesterday. We hope we get more money. We hope we have more to talk about in March. That has been the case since we've been together as a board. But right now, I hope I respond to your question. Right now, if a university wanted to change something, they certainly have a right to do that. If it comes up again, assume we get more money.
More discussion?
Again, Madam Chairman, from listening to President Ken Sharp, this is a process that's been going on for many years, but certainly I'm sure it's a great project. My concern is only that since we have such a significant shortfall of revenues, and all the universities are hurting at this point in time, my question is it at this point wise for this board to approve something in building more buildings rather than spending this money on other universities to educate more kids? That's my simple question. I'm all in favor of a facility. The question is it the time to do it now, or when the shortfall gets corrected one way or the other at a later time? But to spend the money on 35, our state already is in significant lack of money, and to spend this money now for building is a question.
President, would you like to respond?
Well, as I've said before, this is an important project that it has it's time limited, and if we don't fulfill the agreement to begin some kind of construction on the land, then we would, and it's been under negotiation for 3 or 4 years, that we would lose 530 acres of prime property right on the I-4 corridor, and it's 75 miles from the Orlando airport and 75 miles from the Tampa airport. So here is it's a growing area, and certainly the county and the city have been very active in making this the #1 priority for economic development and for education. I hope that and this has been brought up before the Board of Trustees, and it has been passed through the Board of Trustees, so I hope the Board of Governors would understand this.
In the spirit of our governance system, the way it works today, the process has been that the boards of trustees, working with their president and administration, put forth their PICO priority. This has been approved by the University of South Florida boards of trustees. And in my opinion, it is setting a dangerous precedent when we say to trustees who are doing their due diligence that they move forward their lists to be tampered with their list. With that, is there any other comments, questions?
I'd like to comment about your last comment. We're the governing board, and I appreciate the volunteer efforts of the boards of trustees, and I appreciate the volunteer efforts of my colleagues, but I don't believe that we have an obligation to rubber stamp the priority list, or in this case, the order of magnitude of what comes before this board. So I take exception to your last position.
Well, certainly, Governor Desberg, we certainly have the authority, but we have worked very well with our boards of trustees. In fact, I'm quite pleased with the quality of their service, and I understand what you're saying, and we certainly have the authority to do it. I'm telling you how we have worked with them. This board has the authority to change that process, but to date, that's what we've done. And so it's a very serious issue when we change a relationship with boards that we respect and that are trying to support us. So with that, are there any other comments? All in favor? Opposed? Do you need to call? It was Governor Patterson, Governor Desberg. I don't know if there were other no's.
I did.
Governor Zachariah. Okay.
Yes, sir. There are a couple of items that we discussed in our facilities committee on yesterday. I'm sorry that Governor Mosley was unable to join us on yesterday because you actually encouraged us to actually look into our CIPF. And I think that when we did that, we actually found this is a good time for us to make a motion to actually, or actually I should say, we actually started by making it just an information item on our agenda. But after our staff looked into it, we thought it was a good time to go ahead and create it as an action item, because in looking at it, we had some dollars available that we wanted to make sure we had, make them available to the universities. So at this time, what I'd like to do is to move to approve an amendment to the LBR requesting $160 million to be provided for the Capital Improvement Fee Trust Fund.
Do we have an explanation of that? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yeah, if I could just give a discussion. I didn't happen to be there, but I just want to thank you guys for, Ms. Parker and all the BOG staff for looking into it and doing all the research, because from the student perspective, this is obviously a huge thing. We're going to build some new buildings and have some new services. And as you said, we thought it was the right year. It's a great thing. And thank you for all your work.
Governor Mosley. Any other comments or questions?
The one thing I want to bring to your attention is that in our discussions on yesterday, we wanted to see if there's a way to do what we can do to make sure the money gets to universities as soon as possible. And our belief is that we won't have any problem with this being passed by the legislature, so we're assuming by July 31 these dollars will be available. So the chancellor's going to be working with you and FSA to make sure that the student vice presidents are working with their universities so they can go ahead and decide what kinds of things they like to spend this money on, so that, prior to August, at least by August 1, we'll be able to make some decisions and move forward with actually getting the dollars to the campuses. Okay?
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. Chairman Parker.
And then one final item is that we actually have a presentation on several different proposed changes to our regulations. And I guess what I can do is just bring this to the attention of the board. I'm sorry that you were not able to be here on yesterday to actually hear the information that's presented by Chris Kinsley. At this point, what we're going to do is just have a notice of intent, and we'll go ahead and we'll post the information so that it will be on our website, I guess, for the next 60 days, and we'll receive any public comment. So at this point, we're not actually passing these motions of passing these amendments to our regulations. We're just actually passing our notice of intent to amend our regulations. Am I saying that correctly, Chris? Yes. So what I'd like to do is propose that, and I hope that each of you had an opportunity to speak with Chris during your board briefings so you're aware of them. Most of them are just technical changes. There are a few that are substantive. I'm hoping that you address them since you were not here with us on yesterday. So what I can do at this time is just offer a motion to approve the proposed adjustments to our regulations, or notice of intent.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
I have one last item. There was one item that we need to repeal, and I think this was the one involving, I guess, smoking in buildings. And I think that Chris indicated to our committee on yesterday that isn't necessary because there is a constitutional amendment that now says that you cannot smoke in public buildings anyway. So I would move at this time that we would approve the notice to repeal the regulation regarding smoking in public buildings.
All in favor? Opposed? Thank you, Governor Parker.
Those are all the items. We missed you all on yesterday, and I'd ask to be set on this day next time so I can have more people with us.
Absolutely granted.
Thank you.
Chairman Pappas.
We have no action items. Our committee did consider an initial draft of a charter for the audit committee's actions. We had a good discussion about it. We will be bringing forth a document probably within the next meeting for the committee to approve and for the board as a whole to approve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Pappas. Chairman Dasberg.
We had no action items.
Thank you very much. Chairman Perez.
Madam Chair, the Budget Committee met this morning and took several actions to recommend to the board. First action that we took, I'll go by the agenda, the A, B, and C, and then we'll move forward into the other items that were not listed on the agenda. is we did adopt and recommend approval by the board of the notice of intent to appeal the Board of Governors regulations for University Matching Gift Challenge Grant Program. We then adopted or approved to move forward to the board the notice of intent to create BOG regulations with regard to purchasing, those that are listed there, and the notice of intent to repeal specific Board of Governor regulations which are listed below there as well. The committee recommended approval of all of the notice of intent. At this time, I'd like to move all three, Madam Chair.
Is that a motion?
Motion and a second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye. Madam Chair, then the committee took up several motions made by Governor Temple, which are being passed around as we speak. We had several discussions with regard to those motions. There are three. I'd like to take them all at once as they all relate one to the other. The first one, and if anyone has a different Scrivener's opinion, I believe, and I concur with Governor Pappas, I believe this captured what the motions were. Governor Temple, they were your motions, so we'll certainly defer to you if you want to make a change. First being, the Board of Governors direct each institution of the state university system of Florida to align its student enrollment with budget cuts, faculty reductions, and reduced state appropriations. Second motion went on to say that the Chancellor present the Board of Governors with an amended enrollment plan that includes specific enrollment realignments for each institution. And the third motion went on to just add that each institution take the necessary action to carry out the enrollment realignments described above and as may be required in the future. That came out from committee, Madam Chair, so I'll move that on behalf of the Budget Committee.
Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Following that conversation, Madam Chair, the Budget Committee took up a recovery initiative motion of sorts. The motion in committee was voted 4-4. The chair voted in the affirmative to move it to discussion at the board. The entire board was there. Let me read the motion, Madam Chair, and I guess we'll take it from there. The motion is to increase resident undergraduate tuition in equal increments over the next 5 years, sufficient to reach the top of the fourth quartile of the 50 states, and use 70% of the revenues to hire and retain faculty, including related administrative and support costs, with 30% of the increased revenue dedicated to need-based financial aid for eligible students. That was the motion out of committee, Madam Chair.
Is there a second? Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I guess I did vote on the prevailing side of this, but I was a little bit uncomfortable about doing it. I actually would like to see if I could recommend a substitute motion. And it's going to be kind of long, but I'd like to move that we recommend an 8% tuition increase for 2008-2009, and to direct staff to evaluate all sources of revenue used for operating purposes, in other words, other than capital purposes, traditionally available for state university system funding, including, among others, Bright Futures, need-based financial aid, the lottery, general revenue, and tuition and fees, and any other things that you can come up with, and to propose to the board a comprehensive approach to financing our state university system, including a restructuring of Bright Futures and various aid programs that would recognize merit and financial need within the context of our view of appropriate and predictable funding, which would include the necessary tuition and fee increases if needed in order to achieve the quality that we need going forward.
Governor Edwards, do you accept the amended motion? substitute motion. Do we vote now on the substitute motion? We have a second for the substitute motion.
Second.
All right. Discussion on the substitute motion.
I would just say I'm far more comfortable with that version than the original version that came out of committee today, because I do think there are a lot of unintended consequences that could come from some of these policy decisions, and the broader approach, I think, are all important. I think we all are in agreement we've got to bring tuition up, and that's an important thing to do, and delaying that is not a good thing. So I'm far more comfortable with this motion than I was earlier.
So for clarification, you are not including any goal in...
Well, inherent in that, well, for the 8%, yes, I should have been clear. I think we should make it clear that we should have 70% of it apply to reduction of the student-teacher ratio and the necessary support and administrative services, and 30% to go to need-based financial aid. I'm sorry, I did not include that clarification in it. But I just want to say, I think that this board has made it very clear that we recognize the need to increase tuition, and we intend to increase tuition, but we've got to do it in a context of understanding our overall view towards the future. And that's the reason why I make the substitute motion at this time, and hope that we can come up with something, much of which will have to be submitted to the legislature in terms of proposals, because these would require changes in law. But, at least we're taking a proactive look at things and trying to come up and work together with them to come up with the best way of funding our system.
Comments? Governor Mosley?
I would just like to say, too, that I think that's a great motion. I think that's for two reasons. One, I think it does tackle the problem we're addressing, which is tuition increases, is making room for additional funding. But two, is then taking a very thoughtful consideration of how do we move in the future and addressing those big picture problems. And so I also am much more comfortable with this motion. I thank you guys for your time.
Very much. Any other comments?
Yeah, let me just see if I can understand this. So you're proposing 8% instead of 13%.
Just for next year.
Well, wait a minute. You said 2008 and 2009. That's the 2008, 2009 year. So you're going from a 5-year to a 1-year. And then it's still the 70-30. And then you throw in a bunch of other stuff about bright future. But how does that fit in? It's going to come up anyway.
Well, I can tell you what I intended by it. I don't know what anybody else got out of it, but I had asked staff at our break about looking at what we would need based on what we know to try to make up some of the deficit in a way that was material, and that's where I came up with the 8%.
Oh, okay, but that's not in the motion, or it isn't?
Yes, it is in the motion. And then the rest of the stuff is to be able to not have to sit here and arbitrarily pick these percentage increases, but to look at a comprehensive way of trying to address funding generally, which would also include our tuition policy. That was my intent.
The comment originally was on the motion concerning tuition and fees. Now we just say tuition or fees. And I've heard some of the provosts and presidents talk fees are also extremely important for them. Are you including tuition and fees or just tuition?
Well, it's just tuition, which was in the original motion, and that's what's in my motion. But in the second half of my motion, I'm having them look at tuition and fees.
Governor Harrison?
items B and C, what time frame do you have?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Coming back?
In your packet, there is something that looks like, it's on the back of this, the last 2 pages of this, and it says appropriate and predictable funding, and I asked, we were not going to take it up. It was given to us as information, but it was something that was supposed to be taken up in March, and it basically is suggesting the same kind of a look, and it was asking this, it will ask for the university presidents that get put on this committee to do this by June, and I guess I would like to accelerate that.
The March meeting was intended in part to deal with appropriate and predictable funding. It's going to be a very, complex discussion, but we're ready to move forward. And I appreciate the amendment, and I think it's a prudent way to move forward.
So more comments, Governor Edwards?
I understand the sentiment. Obviously, this is going to pass. I don't object to that. However, I would just like to point out we are again delaying the inevitable. I would hope that this report would come forward with notice so nobody's caught by surprise. And I think, I keep referring to everyone as Regent, my apologies. Governor Gus, how's that? His comments earlier were right on the money. We can't expect much more from the state. If we're going to move ahead, it's got to be with some type of a tuition that is going to be a lot higher than we have now, but still substantially lower than the national average. We're kidding ourselves if we don't accept that concept. And I would just hope that most of the people who voted for the first part of this motion the first time will vote for it when the chancellor comes back with his report, because I would almost guarantee you a major portion of that will have to deal with increased tuition.
Call the question.
All in favor? Aye. Wait, what were you asking? The substitute. This is for the substitute. Opposed? Thank you very much. The substitute motion passes.
Madam Chair, that concludes our Budget Committee report. No, actually it does not. I apologize, Madam Chair. Additionally, following that discussion, the Budget Committee took up certain recommendations, requests from the Strategic Planning Committee to deal with various areas of the Forward by Design plan. We've asked the President's Working Group together with staff to take a look at those issues on our behalf and give us a report back in the March and June meetings. That concludes our report, Madam Chair.
Is that a motion?
No, ma'am, just a
No
notice.
motion. We're through with the action items. Yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to also ask staff to bring back to us additional indices that are more appropriate for the discussion. Again, the two that they brought to us today show us at 50th. I'm sure there are others out there that show us in a better light. So I'd like to see those brought back to us as well. Okay?
Yes, thank you very much. Chairman,
Since all of the board was here for basically the Student Affairs Committee, I'd like to just move the two notices of intent to create new regulations, one, and to amend one. The first one had to do with the meningococcal meningitis and hepatitis B vaccines, and the second one had to do with acceleration mechanisms. I move them as a group. Do I have a second?
Second.
we have a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Yes.
Thank you.
No.
You voted no?
Yes, I did.
Would you please break that record, please?
Only the last one, but you moved them both.
Yeah, I moved them both. I apologize.
All right, that concludes your...
That concludes my report.
We are now moving to item 4. And we'll ask Vicki Shirley to lead this part of the discussion.
Chair.
Yes, sir, Governor Edwards.
Item A, dealing with government in the sunshine. Item A, dealing with government in the sunshine, was drafted at my request by staff. I announced last meeting I would do this. I was amazed to find out from several different universities and their legal counsel that the legal counsel had actually been advising some of their direct support organizations that they were not subject to government in the sunshine, when I think the law is clear that they are. But despite that, clearly I believe, and I would hope that everyone else on this board would believe, that our business is public business, that it should be in the public and it should be subject to sunshine, and all this does is make it part of our regulations so that the various independent university councils can't say, well, we didn't know. I would move approval of item 4A.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next proposed regulation in your packet deals with conflicts of interest.
Wait, sorry, you made a motion, a second, I've lost control. Yes. Yeah, on 4A. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Governor Edwards, you have to help me, I kind of lost control there for me. Thank you. Go ahead, Vicki, I apologize.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Governor Dasper had asked me about a month ago or more to draft a conflicts of interest regulation. The proposed regulation is applicable to the board members, the chancellor, the vice chancellors, and all board employees who hold a position in senior management service or select exempt service. In a nutshell, this regulation is designed to supplement the Florida Code of Ethics for Public Officers and Employees, which you as board members and we as professional staff must comply with. Paragraph 1 of the proposed regulation provides that each officer and employee must endeavor to avoid participating in activities that may give rise to an actual or potential conflict of interest between the officer or employee's private interests and his or her public duties and responsibilities to the board and the state university system. The regulation defines a conflict of interest consistent with the Florida Code of Ethics for Public Officers, in that a conflict of interest may arise when an officer or employee's private interests, including those of an officer or employee's relatives, may affect the officer or employee's independent judgment or ability to impartially perform his or her duties. Paragraph 2 discusses the disclosure of potential conflicts. You as board members and we as professional staff already each July 1 file a statement of financial interest with the Commission on Ethics. What this regulation does is impose an additional disclosure requirement that you would file a statement of interest every July 1 with the board's corporate secretary, identifying any personal, familial, or business relationships that you may have with any organization that does business with the board or the state university system. So that is a requirement over and above what the Code of Ethics requires. Business relationships include those in which you, your spouse, or child serves as an officer, director, or proprietor in an organization, or has a material ownership interest in the total assets or capital stock which exceeds 5% of the organization. Familial relationships include, of course, your spouse, your children, your siblings, and all of your in-laws, and that means father-in-law, mother-in-law, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, brother-in-law, sister-in-law. That's a lot of in-laws, and we all have them, but that's what the law requires, so I'm making this consistent. Paragraph 3 addresses voting conflicts and the procedure for disclosing a voting conflict. Florida law allows appointed public officers to vote on matters that may inure to their private gain or loss, or their spouse or relative's private gain or loss, or their principal's private gain or loss, so long as the nature of the private interest is disclosed prior to the vote. The method of disclosure depends on whether the officer intends to make any attempt to influence the decision prior to the meeting at which the vote will be taken. If so, the officer must complete a memorandum of voting conflicts, which is a form that the Commission on Ethics has on its website and will have in the office, prior to making any such attempts, and will file the memo with the board's corporate secretary for incorporation into the board's minutes. This memo must be provided to other board members and read publicly at the meeting. Alternatively, if the officer does not intend to make any attempt to influence the decision, except by discussion or vote at the meeting, the officer still must orally disclose the conflict before participating in the vote and subsequently file within 15 days of the vote a memorandum of voting conflict with the board's corporate secretary, which likewise will be provided to the other board members and must be publicly read at the next meeting. Paragraph 4 reiterates current law in the code that prohibits officers or employees from holding an employment or a contractual relationship with any entity regulated by this board. Officers and employees are also prohibited under law from having any employment or contractual relationship with any organization that will pose a frequently recurring conflict between their private interests and their public duties. The one thing that's in the proposed draft that needs to be clarified is there are certain exemptions in the Code of Ethics, but those exemptions, which I had noted, actually only apply to advisory boards, which obviously this board is not. Thank you. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Second? Any questions, comments? Dr. Parker?
I forgot to ask you this during my briefing, Vicki, but the policy that we drafted, is this, you follow some existing policy, and you may have said this earlier, and I missed it in your opening remarks. So this like
Yes, I looked at UCF. University of Central Florida has a very good conflicts of interest policy, as does North Carolina and Texas. And all require a disclosure above and beyond what's simply required by law, so that you would have to file a statement with the corporate office as far as any personal, familial, or business relationships you have with any organization that does business with us or the state university system on an annual basis. Okay.
Questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Our very busy council. Thank you, Vicki. We have one more item, I believe, if I'm not confused, which could possibly be 5. Considered agenda items, right? Is that all we have left? All right, number 5, the consent agenda. Do we have a move? Has everybody been appropriately briefed? Do we have a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Second? Second. All in favor? Just a way is thank you. I want to continue to say we're a merging board. I want to congratulate these board members. I think we have celebrated our birthday by emerging as a powerful board that's working in the appropriate manner for the best interest of this state. Thank you very much for your time and for your service. Meeting adjourned.